Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. I'm Dagget, this is Dagget Designs. In today's video, we are tackling another half sleeve tattoo design. That's right, I've got another half sleeve tattoo design for you guys, so this is going to be a full illustration process from start to finish on designing a half sleeve tattoo. If you already know you're going to love today's video, make sure you smash that like button, and while you're down there, make sure you leave me a comment letting me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Without further ado, let's get straight into today's video by going to the overhead. Okay guys, welcome back to the table. So we've got an A3 sketchbook here that we're using for our half sleeve design. I've got a mechanical pencil to sketch our design and an eraser should we need it. Now I've already drawn out a half sleeve template, so this is the top of that sleeve and it comes down into a half sleeve. Now if you'd like to follow along in today's video, you'll need this template. There'll be a link in the description where you can download this template for free, and then you can just trace it onto whatever paper you are using. So as you guys probably already know from the thumbnail and the title of this video, we're doing a Grim Reaper, sort of neo-traditional Japanese influenced design, sort of a mix of different styles there. And we're going to be doing it as a half sleeve. So I'm going to start by putting in the sort of skull area for our Grim Reaper, and then we'll be building other elements around it. So we're going to start by adding a circle in around this area. Now I also don't want to just say what I'm doing and you guys just copy and follow along. I'd like to sort of explain to you guys the reason why I'm doing certain things. So as I go through this process, I'll be trying to explain some of the subtleties and nuances that I put in there. So I've just cut off the side of my sphere here using a smaller oval on the side. This is to give us the side plane for the head. We'll bring a line down in the direction that our head is looking in. And then we'll bring a center line through that and across the front of the face. This is our eyebrow ridge. I'll bring a curved line around from the top and cut that straight down across the front for the front of the face area. Now we can add in a little line for our chin and find the center point between this line and your chin, which is roughly here. That is where your nose is going to sit. And then you can link this up to the outside part of the face, and you can come back and up to your little oval there on the side. And if you want to bring a line up and to the center of this circle, that gives you the side sort of plane of the cheek, which for doing a skull is sort of really important to get these structures in place. Now halfway between the nose line and the chin is going to be the line of your teeth. So you can just bring a little line in like that. And I like to also bring in the actual line for the bottom of the eye. So I just come up a little bit from where our circle is and come around the front like this to give me space for the eye there. Now when I'm designing a half sleeve like this, I don't like to draw all of my details in, because then when I start to place all my other elements, I may need to erase a big chunk of my details, so there's kind of no point doing that. I like to start by building up different shapes. I think that's a better way to go. So what we'll do is I'll just bring down a bit of a collar line from this guy, just to start with, give us a placement for his head. And I'm going to have his hand holding a scythe around this area, because I want to sort of follow the curvature at the top of our half sleeve here. So I might bring across a little triangular box shape like this, and I'll split that off into 4 sections like that. That's going to give us the bones in the center of the hand there, just above the palm. You can go ahead and drop that down into a wrist shape, which is just going to be a box that expands like this, and then you could split that off in the middle with 2 lines like this. Now before we actually draw in the fingers, I want to draw in that scythe. So I'm going to have this one starting right at the bottom, curling up and going behind his head for that classic Grim Reaper look. So I'll bring, sort of coming from inside the hand, you want to bring a line out and forward and down like this. And I'll do the same thing next to that, obviously. And I'll have it taper out slightly towards the bottom so that it looks like it's coming out towards us. You can continue that line up and across the shoulder here. And I like to give it a bit of an unnatural curve so you can play around with your shapes a little bit. And I'll bring that right up to the edge of our template here. Like I said, I like to have a sort of unnatural curve to it, like it's a more natural stick that's been carved into a scythe. So I like to give it a little bit more of an unnatural shape. Around this point, I'd like to have the little secondary handle that the scythe has. So just coming out with a little shape for that handle. Now that you've got the basic shape for your scythe, we can go ahead and start adding in the fingers. So generally I'd start down here with the pinky, that's the one that's closest to us. And I'll just throw in a little box like this that's angled down in this direction. Adding another little rectangle like this, and one coming back in this direction. Now I do find it's important to play around with your sizes a little bit here, because these are going to be bones, so there are going to be windows in between the fingers, and you'll just need to play around with that. Bring another little box up like this. Again, bringing it down for that knuckle. And behind. And you can, again, just play around with your shapes a little bit. I like to bring that down and behind. For the third knuckle up, it's going to be a little bit longer, because this is the middle finger. And I'll bring that down. So you want these to go around like they're wrapping around the handle of the scythe here. And the index finger will be a little bit more relaxed. So just bringing up my little rectangle shape like this. Having that wrap across the front of the scythe. And the tip of the finger will just be hanging there. So it's going to be a little bit more of a relaxed pose with the index finger there. Now I did say I wanted to wrap my design using the scythe. So I think a really good way to cut off the top of the sleeve is with an object that rounds off and actually follows the shape of the shoulder. So I'll bring the scythe up like this, follow the exact top line of my shoulder there, and then you can cut back across like this, following that same curve, and back into your handle there. And at this point I just double up on that bottom line, widening my taper, and then cut straight down like that. That's going to give you the bladed portion of your scythe. Okay, so what are we going to have as our background elements? Because I don't want the body to just stop and then, you know, sudden cut off at the bottom here. I do see it happen sometimes with tattoo designs. I don't really like the way it looks. I sort of like everything to flow, and if there's going to be a point where it cuts off, I like to have other features disguising that cut off point. So I think in this one, we're going to have some chrysanthemums. So I'm going to map in a circle here for a chrysanthemum. And we'll go with the classic up here as well. So I try to have them on opposite corners of the design. And in this case, we have one coming up at the very top of the sleeve towards the left, or towards the chest area. And we've got one towards the bottom back end of the sleeve that's going to help cut off and disguise the bottom portion of our design. Now, I'm not going to go through my entire process for drawing chrysanthemum flowers in this video. I'll leave a link in the description down below of one of my chrysanthemum tutorials I've done previously. I'm using the exact same method for this one. I'll just give you guys a really quick rundown. So I've got my circle here. I'm going to add another little circle, which is where I want my stamens to be. That's the center of our flower, so it's facing off in this direction. And then I'm going to start adding ovals like this, with little lines that come around like that. And they are going to represent my petals for the time being. So this is how I construct my chrysanthemum flowers when I'm drawing them for these tattoo designs. Like I said, I'm not going to go into depth and detail on how to do chrysanthemums. I've covered this in previous videos, and it's something that I feel like most of you have a pretty good grasp on. And if you're not sure yet, you can go ahead and watch one of those tutorial videos. Like I said, I'll leave a link in the description to a nice in-depth tutorial on how I draw peony flowers, chrysanthemum flowers, and this will give you a really good starting point. Alright, so at this stage I have mapped out my chrysanthemums using that method, and you can see that it starts to fill out the design a lot more once you've filled in your chrysanthemums. Now, a couple of pointers on this. For the bottom chrysanthemum, I have a leaf coming out towards the left. Now, that is there for a reason. The bottom of that leaf covers the end of my scythe here. Now, the reason for that, and the reason for this chrysanthemum being here, is if the body of the Grim Reaper was to just come down and stop, that's going to look really strange. As well as if the body stops and the scythe keeps going, or the scythe stops, it looks really strange. So to border off or frame off our design, I'm using florals, which is very, very common with these style designs, especially among the neo-traditional style. So I've used a leaf just coming out to the left here to cover up the bottom of my scythe. The main body of the flower is helping to sort of cover parts of our Grim Reaper body, and we'll get to this side in a moment. For the top flower, that sort of fills out this space a little bit. It brings a little bit of color to this top area because the middle of our design is going to be quite dark, and this is going to sort of aid with the contrast of things. So I've got a flower at the bottom which is going to be bright, a more dark sort of focus point in the middle, which is our subject matter, and then another bright point at the top here. So it sort of plays into the composition a little bit. So we're going to start with the hood, or the veil that he's going to be wearing. I guess it's more of a hood coming over his head. So I'll start by coming out from our left side here. And this portion is going to be the inside of the hood. And it's going to come up and across the face like this. And it'll cut back down at this point. And I'm going to have some other fabric draped over the top of it, so I'll just stop it at that point. You can bring a line from the outside here up, following the direction and shape of your head, like this. So you can see that is the hood over the top. This would be shaded, and that's the inside portion of the hood on the left side of the skull there. And I might add a little fold in like this. Now your folds are just going to be like little hook lines like that. Now I'm going to bring another piece of fabric up like this, back towards the back of the head. And that's going to cut across the front of the piece of fabric that we just drew. It's going to cut across it and then drop straight down to cut off this portion of it here. And I'm going to have that turn into some torn fabric, the way that we normally see Grim Reapers depicted. Now you want to make sure there's actually enough room for your skull in there, so I'll bring this up a little bit more, like this. And I might drop that down into one of our little hook shapes. It's almost like drawing the letter J. And that's going to give you one of your little foldovers in the fabric. I'll come out from there again. Trying to keep things angular. I like to keep my fabric a little bit angular. Maybe add in another little fold over point like this. Try to keep them a little more loose. And then I'll come out, back down and forward. So I'll leave it like that for now for the back of our hood, and I'll start adding in the front portion. So I like to just add in these little tears, which are pretty straightforward. They're just like little S curves basically, and you're adding in these little torn pieces of fabric, or they're going to look like torn fabric once you paint them all in like this. And you can come down the other side and do the same thing as though you're seeing it from the other side. Okay, looking at doing the portion that comes down onto this shoulder here. So I've got this area where there's a V here. That's going to be the cutoff point for our robe here. So I'm just going to bring a line up like this and to the top, and bring a few folds down like this to come to our scythe there. And then you can bring the fabric around, and I'm pretty much just going to put in a little area for our shoulder using that same technique we've been using, adding in those little J curves and trying to keep our lines a little bit angular. You don't have to do it like that. You can do really smooth robes if you'd like. I just like my lines to be a little bit more angular. Now at this point you can see we've got the shoulder coming off to the side there and sort of disappearing off. So what I'm actually going to do to border this a little bit better is I'll drop it down a little bit more, like this. And I'll bring up another chrysanthemum petal, like this. Now that chrysanthemum petal is actually bordering off the edge of that shoulder, so we don't just disappear off into nothing. Okay, now looking at doing the other side. So I'm going to come out from here again, starting off with that collar area with a few little folds. I like to keep them angular, like I said. And I want to come out to about here for our shoulder area, so I'll bring out a line like this. I might drop that down into a little curve so that we can have a fold in our fabric. And I'll bring that down a little bit. And at this point, you're going to drop in quite a few of those little J-curves to give you sort of different angles on your fabric. And that'll make a lot more sense once we start painting this in, how that actually becomes more like a fabric. Okay, to connect this up with here, I'd like to just draw in this area first. So I'll probably come down to about here for the sleeve. I might just drop in a few lines like this, coming up over the top, back and dropping down into a curve like that. I'll come out of there. I might drop into a really large curve like this. We'll have a nice big dip in the fabric there. And then maybe just come out and down for the end of where the elbow would be. And then I want to have that torn fabric again for the edge of this cloak. So I'm going to bring a line forward like this and start adding in the tears probably to about this point. Now, once I reach that point, I want to have a flip over section. So this is where the cloak is actually sort of rolled out on itself. So I'm going to bring a little W curve sort of shape like this. And then we can start actually adding tears to the inside of that curve. And this will be a lot, this will make a lot more sense once it's painted, but you're essentially doing the inner side of your fabric here. So it's flipped out and folded back on itself. Now for the other side of the sleeve, you can go ahead and put in some tears that just run down behind your scythe there. And I like to just drop in a couple of curved lines like this for folds that would be in the fabric, because that's obviously going to be painted. And now for this section here, I want to have the cloak just sort of draping off at the bottom there, which is going to create a nice cutoff point for our design. So I'll just drop down another fold like this, always coming out first from behind a fold and then dropping down with a smooth curve. And I sort of want that to end on a little bit of a peak, so I'll round that out like this. And you can of course add in some other little folds if you'd like. Okay, now from here you can see that our design is pretty much ready in terms of composition. If there's anything you're not happy with, go ahead and change it now. And when we come back, we're going to start adding in the details for this one. Okay, so we're going to start looking at adding some of our details to the face. I'm going to start off by adding in the nose. So I like to do like an upside down triangle or an upside down love heart shape for the nose. Like this. To add in the shape for our eyes, I like to come back a little bit on the right side here and just drop a line down. And I'll work off that line coming up, back, and down. It's going to be flat towards the back, and then forward, under, and back up like this. So there should be a little bit more of a slope on this top angle here at the back. For the other side, you're going to come up right off the edge of the nose there, up and out, to come flat across the top again and down. I have a bit of a backwards curve and coming out, and then you can come straight across the bottom and back up like this. So it's going to be slightly obscured or cut off by the side of our face there, and that's where we can start to map in our cheek areas. So coming in from this left edge, we'll come out from where the eye is, and we'll come out, back in, and down towards our nose like this. And then for the mouth area, we can just dip down slightly like this to a bit of a point. And we'll come back up around the side of our contour and back up. And then coming from the other side of our nose here, we can rough out the other side of our cheek like this. Now for the bottom jaw, I want to keep the opposite shape to the top. So just coming down, around, and back up for the teeth. And then you can drop a line that comes around like this for the jaw. I like to drop that in and back out. A little triangle towards the bottom. And then back around for the bottom of the jaw there. And then for the eyebrow ridge on the outside here, I'll just come out, back in, and then up and around for the top of the head. On the other eye, there's just going to be this little section that comes up and angles back like that. Now, detailing out our skull is pretty much going to be very similar to the way I've done it in previous videos. To give you a little rundown, on the inside of the eyes, I like to add in these little hollow areas, these little cracks and hollow areas for the inside of the eyes. If you look at a real skull, they're not, holes directly through. There is bone at the back of the eye socket, and then there's these little holes or little cavities at the back there that help connect everything. For the inside of my nose, I like to bring that center portion up and out a little bit, and then back into the nose. That's just a style preference thing. You certainly don't have to do it, and real skulls obviously do not look like that. But that's just the way that I like to do my noses. You can add some little lines of detail. A lot of the little texture details and lines I don't do in the sketch phase. I will leave those for a little bit later on, and I'll add them in when I'm doing my line work, or even when I'm shading the design. I can add more texture to it. I'll add this outside line to the nose, and as I get up onto the crest here where the eyebrow ridge is, I'll just bring down some details for the nose. Now for adding in my teeth, I use that center line that we already have to split the two front teeth. And you can just add these little teeth shape in basically. You can either do a full set of teeth, or you can leave some of them out and have the skull a little bit more decayed and falling apart a little bit more. Again, this is something I'll usually do when I'm inking it. Sometimes I'll drop in all of the teeth. It just depends how I want this guy to look, but you can just play around with getting rid of some teeth, leaving certain teeth in. It's completely up to you how you want this guy to look. Now there's all sorts of little details you can add, like these little cracks in the skull and things like that. You can just go and look at some reference pictures of skulls online. Not necessarily tattoo designs, but looking at actual skulls, and just have a look what kind of details they have, and you can pick which ones you would like to add to your design. There's obviously a lot of style preference here. You want to make it your own a little bit and sort of change it up. That's completely okay. That's what art is all about. So let's look at drawing in our hand. Now there's going to be a little section at the back here of small bones. So I like to just bring these forward a little bit. And you kind of, it's, the way that I do this is very similar to just drawing in like the classic little dog bone shape. Skinny in the middle and sort of, two little rounder areas at the end. So kind of like a drumstick bone. And you could of course get more anatomically correct, look at some reference pictures of skeletons, play around with it. But I sort of like doing it like this. It gives it a little bit more of a classic look, and I've never really had any problems drawing them like this. I just think they look nice just by adding in these shapes. So I just add in these little bone shapes for the part that is where the palm sits, like this. Now as they go back, they're going to get further and further more obscured by the bone in front of it, so you want to make sure you layer those correctly. And you come off with a similar shaped bone for the section in front of it. So it's really simple to do these little sections of bone. And again, at this sort of scale, they don't need to be super accurate. If you were doing this guy a lot bigger, maybe if you were doing it more close up, the finger areas more close up, you'd want to add more detail to it and make sure this was super accurate. But in terms of doing a little illustration like this, that's not going to be too big, I don't really aim too much for accuracy, more just for aesthetic, like what I think looks good and what I think suits the design and looks nice for the design. Now once you've added in all of those, you can go ahead and add in some of these little wrist bones. So again, I like to sort of eyeball these. I did look at some reference pictures for them, and then from there I sort of just make them up a little bit, sort of follow the reference as closely as possible, sort of make them look somewhat realistic. You've got these little bones in the wrist, the pebble sort of bones. And then I'll come off for the wrist for the bone that's on the outside of the arm here. So I'll bring a little bit of that bone texture out and drop it back. And these larger areas of bone you can add a bit of texture and detail to. I'll have a little split in the center like this. And I'll bring out some bone from the other side and just drop it down. So again, this is that same sort of dog bone shape. and I'm just playing around with adding some little textures and details to it and making sure it's sort of on the right angle to an extent. Now I want to demonstrate to you guys how I'm going to be texturing the scythe to make it look somewhat realistic like a wood grain, but I'm just going to use this small area to give you guys an example of that. So I'm going to bring a couple of lines around like this, and I'm always going to work with sort of sharp jagged lines like that, and this is to give it like a rough texture and a bit of an angled look to it. And I might just add some bumps at the end to where that joins into the main handle, and then you can add these little lines, very rough texture lines in. This is the same way that I do horns on a Hannya mask. So you're adding in these, they're almost like scribbles. You're doing like a little squiggle, and then you just taper that line off, and that's going to give you the texture or the wood grain texture for your handle. Now, once I've added all of the details to my design, as well as detailing out my chrysanthemum flowers, there's one last background element I'd like to add to these empty spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that now. So for these background spaces that are, quite empty, I still want to have those bordered off. So the way I'm going to do that is just by adding in these little clouds. They're basically like little swirls. Now you could do this like traditional style clouds, or I've got these slightly different style clouds that I'm doing now, which are like almost long ways. So they're a little bit different to what we'd normally see with maybe a traditional style design. So yeah, I'm basically just going to go through and fill in all of those little areas where there's no design, and I'm just filling in those areas using my little cloud patterns that I like to do on some of these designs, especially if I want it to have a bit of a spooky look, like a Grim Reaper. This is kind of a spooky design. Then sometimes I'll add in these little elements like these little clouds that kind of look a little bit foggy as well, because they sit on a horizontal plane to the rest of the design. Okay, so we have finished our sketch. We've done all of the background elements, and it all looks really nice as a half sleeve design. So this is how I would put together a Grim Reaper style half sleeve design. And I forgot to mention that chrysanthemums are typically represented as funeral flowers in Japan. So that's why I had like a little bit of a Japanese twist. This is how I would normally draw Japanese chrysanthemum flowers. And then we've got more neo-trad style happening with our Grim Reaper, but overall the design I would say is neo-traditional. Now I'm going to go ahead and transfer the design over to some watercolor paper using some fine liners. So let's go. Alright, so the line work for this one is now finished. I've gone ahead and transferred it to watercolor paper, and I want to talk a little bit about the lining process. So I basically used a combination of 3 different lining nibs. I used a 1.2, a 0.5, and a 0.05 for really fine detail lines. So you can probably already tell, but I used a 1.2 for all of my bold boosted lines around the scythe, around this hand here, and most of the robes around the top there, with the exception of this area and this area of torn fabric. I used a 0.5 to outline most of our skull and any other sort of detail areas, including both of my chrysanthemum flowers, with the exception of this leaf, which I did with a 1.2 to sort of pull it forward and boost it up in front of everything else. I used a 0.5 to do all the background clouds. You could do those in grey as well, or an even smaller liner. I just like the contrast between the line work and the shading when I use a slightly thicker line. And I used a 0.05 for all the small details inside the face of our skeleton here. And you could of course use it for some of your texture lines throughout the scythe. Now looking at this design, you can see that it wraps from the heading onto the chest here. We have this wrapping around the top portion of the arm with the curvature following. And the design flows forward with the shape of the muscle structure of the arm. And of course you have the nice bordering of the 2 chrysanthemums to really border off this as a half sleeve. Now that is it for today's video, guys. Now if you are not subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss part 2 of this Grim Reaper half sleeve tattoo design, when we go ahead and do all of the black shading and color work to really bring this design to life. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you followed along and that you're ready for next week's video when we finish this one off. and I'll see you guys next time. Alright, bye-bye. If you like the content that I make and you'd like to support the channel, make sure you smash that like button. And hey, while you're at it, check out one of these other great videos.